welcome to another episode of Happy Mum, Happy Baby, the podcast. Today's guest is a businesswoman. She has her own fashion label. She is an ambassador of the British Fashion Council, as well as Save the Children. She won the Great Sports Relief Bake Off in 2016, which, I am in awe of. And she's a mother of 4 and married to a man named David. You know, he was Prime Minister from 2010 to 2016, which means that she has brought up children in Downing Street, which I find absolutely fascinating. It is Samantha Cameron. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here. Very exciting.
It's very strange because we're together but not, because we're doing this remotely.
Yes, we are in lockdown. We are 4 weeks, are we now, into lockdown nearly?
And we're at very opposite ends of that, because I've got 3 little ones running around who require a lot. And you've got older ones who, actually, when we talked about this earlier, you said something amazing. You're in lockdown at a point where, you know, they're teenagers. You're almost starting to lose them a bit, but now they're stuck with you. So you've pulled them back a bit. You've got a bit more time with them. Yeah,
no, it's been really lovely. None of us had time to work out what we were expecting. And I think my daughter was supposed to be doing GCSEs, so I was in sort of shock for the first couple of days, and I can't see my friends. But then suddenly they know they can't go anywhere, and so they're not fighting against it. And so they're kind of very happy hanging out with you, and you feel like you've just got them kind of focused as a family for a little bit longer when they're at that point where they're really trying to kind of fly the nest a bit.
That must be really nice.
It is. It's been great. Actually, we just had a really lovely supper, and I was telling them I was about to do this podcast, and I think we'll hopefully look back on this, and I'm sure it won't be for all people, and we're very lucky. It's quite a kind of nice family time when we, had time to really spend some time together.
It's weird, isn't it? I kind of feel like when we look back, there's obviously people who live in very different, people that live in London, and it must feel very different. Whereas for me, I feel like I'm living in a little bubble with my family. So when my grandkids say, what was it like? I'll be like, I don't really know. Not really. You know what I mean? It's a very odd time.
Yeah, we're in Oxfordshire, and I'm working, but luckily I have a 9-year-old and I work full time, so I have a nanny, and she's come down here with us. We're normally in London in school term time, and so she's helping with the homeschooling of my 9-year-old while I'm working. But I'm having Zoom meetings with these poor parents who have got kind of 2-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, and maybe both of them are working. They're living in an apartment or flat in London, and they've got the 2-year-olds trying to crawl onto their lap while they're trying to have a really important kind of Zoom business meeting, when I'm having conversations with the wholesalers, Net-a-Porter or Matches, and it's really quite surreal. You could be talking to quite senior people, and there they are trying to deal with all the normal stuff that we all have to deal with as parents, but you don't normally see in the work situation.
Do you think that's good, though, in a way of, I think we all try and put this front on of knowing what we're doing and being professional at all times, and actually this has kind of forced us all to scale that back a bit, and it is a case of it is what each Zoom meeting, I'm like, it is what it is. If my child runs in, that's going to happen, I can't pretend.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do. I think it's easier if you're all parents. I always think it's difficult, when you work with a lot of people who aren't parents, or the moment I remember thinking, I was working really hard in my 20s, and I had a boss who had children, and thinking, oh God, it's quite annoying sometimes, her with her children, and she makes such a fuss about things. And then I remember, when I had a child, thinking, now I understand. And funnily enough, my assistant in Downing Street, Isabel, said the same thing to me when she had a baby. She's like, when I was working for you in Downing Street, it was so frustrating sometimes, the way you wanted to do things and the way you thought about things because you were a parent. And now I've had a baby, it all kind of, and now I understand what you were going through and why you made a fuss about this or that. So I think it's very easy for me to understand. I think it must be quite weird for people who don't have children suddenly dealing with people in Zoom meetings whose 2-year-olds are trying to crawl onto their lap or whatever.
Well, I keep seeing those amazing things going around about all the things you can do in lockdown, all the, the new hobbies that you can pick up and the skills that you can learn. I'm like, what? I'm still trying to do all my normal stuff, but now I've got 3 kids at home constantly who want my attention the whole time. So I'd love to pick up my old saxophone and learn how to do that. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah. No, I think it's the difference between kind of still working, and I suppose for people who have been furloughed, and I have some staff in that situation, you are presumably sitting at home quite bored. But I think if you're trying to work, I've become obsessed by cleaning, and I've bought a super mop this week. I get off at 6 in the morning to kind of mop and clean the loos while doing work and the kids. I've never been busier.
It is, isn't it? It's just so much more on your plate all of a sudden.
Yes. Luckily, my husband's a very good cook, so he's set himself this kind of target, and he's having to do quite a lot of conference calls too. But he says his target that he will cook all the meals during lockdown, which actually with my teenage daughter he has done. I haven't had to cook any. I've done a lot of washing up and a lot of cleaning, but I haven't had to do much in the way of cooking. So I am lucky.
Has he always loved cooking, or has that been something that started now that he's at home more?
He's very greedy. We're both very greedy. We sort of fell in, one of the reasons why we're a kind of good couple, we sort of fell in love initially, sort of partly over food, with each other. And so I think he cooks because he's always paranoid that there's not going to be a kind of meal on the table, or it's always big enough. Or, when we were in our 20s, I remember before we had children, my boss saying to me, how old do your children have to be before you think you have to do Sunday lunch? And I'm like, well, we don't have any children. My husband cooks Sunday lunch every Sunday already. And we had to have a kind of starter for every kind of, starter and a main course kind of every evening when we were at home. We don't now, because otherwise we'd be enormous. We're always trying not to eat so much.
A starter and a main course.
Yeah, so getting back, he's always loved cooking, and he's got better and better at it. It's sort of Jamie Oliver style cooking. It's not sort of cordon bleu, but...
Yeah, so it's basically the food that everyone wants to eat.
Man food.
Just look at.
Yeah. I'm going, have we got any vegetables? Are there any vegetables?
I've realised that I love cooking, and the main reason for that is, so we've got an open plan, so I can see everything going on anyway, but I can kind of, if Tom's there, I can zone out. It's like that therapeutic thing of I'm cooking, it's going in, and I'm just like tunnel visioned into what I'm doing. I can no longer see anything. I'm no longer in control. That's your domain. I'm cooking.
Yes.
It's that weird thing of kind of being out of it.
No, I think that's what he said when he was in Downing Street. He used to come up, because when you're in Downing Street, I think people imagine that you have lots of help up in the flat, but you don't have any. We had our nanny because I was working, and there's a lovely Downing Street cleaner who would come in for a couple of hours in the morning. But other than that, you get no, there's no sort of, not like you get a kind of chef or something like in the White House. And so Dave would come up, and I'd go, okay, you can do reading with the children, or you can cook supper. And he would cook supper, but because he found it really relaxing. He genuinely finds cooking was a kind of, having been downstairs, chairing lots of meetings and having people kind of, wanting his attention all day long, that, like you say, just being in that zone, in that on your own cooking for him while I was upstairs putting the children to bed was his kind of escape moment.
Yeah. We'll go back to Downing Street in a bit, but what was your childhood like?
I am the eldest of 8. I've got 7 younger siblings. My mum had me when she was about 21, 22. And then my parents got divorced when I was about 4, and then they got remarried again and had more children. And I was very lucky, but, within a few years, they all became best friends. The 4 parents, and of course, like with any divorce, of course there are kind of issues, so I ended up having 4 parents and 8 children, and we spent quite a lot of Christmases and school holidays and half terms and weekends, all of us together. So it was very noisy, very happy, initially in London and then in the countryside. So I look back on it as a kind of, really magical time, and I'm very close to all my siblings. I think when there's so many of you, and my mum worked, she had her own business from the age of 17, so she always worked, and I had an amazing nanny called Babs who still lives at home with my mum.
That's amazing.
Yeah. We were her kind of last family. She'd looked after a lot of families, and I think we were the last family that she looked after. So she now lives with my mum and my stepdad. And she was, she's great. It's like having a second mum. I feel quite, I know it's not the kind of what everyone else's experience of having divorced parents, and I was very lucky, but I feel I had, 3 mums, 2 dads, loads of siblings. And I think, particularly as a teenager, it can be, if you have a kind of relatively kind of happy divorced parents, I think as a teenager you have your different personalities, and your parents have different personalities. And I think sometimes I could go to my dad and my stepmom and be one person, and then I could be with my mum and my stepdad and be another person. And they both, because they're sort of slightly different, there was that sort of lack of intensity that you might have as a teenager when you're all in one family, and you can kind of be slightly different people with different parents, which I found. I mean, of course, there were downsides as well, and I'm quite good at, looking at the upsides. But that was one of the upsides, I think.
Yeah. But it sounds like a joyous and loud...
Yeah, noisy.
Way to grow.
It was definitely noisy.
Did it make you wonder, did it make you think ahead to how many children you would have?
I think I always wanted a big family, though I think we were quite aware growing up that it was more fun for us than it was for our parents.
Really?
Because we would gang up on them. I mean, that's what's really terrifying. If you have a lot of children and they're relatively close in age, and they suddenly decide to gang up on you because they don't like whatever it is you want them to do, they sort of can. And there were aspects when we were a bit older when that happened. So I think even then, I say you're quite aware that it's probably more fun for you as children than for the parents, but still wanting to have, I think when I had a family, enough of that, But then you start having your own children, and we parent differently to our parents, or at least I'm 49, so different to how my parents parented. And the idea of having 5 or 6, I mean, I just can't imagine. I mean, how you would give that many children kind of attention. I don't think they really did. I think that's why we were so close to each other as siblings, because you don't get that much attention to your parents, and so you have to get on with your siblings. And I think all of us find it quite shocking when you meet friends of yours as you're growing up who really don't get on with their siblings for one reason or another. And for us, we find that, shocking and surprising, because the idea that we wouldn't get on. I'm not saying it's easy all of the time. Of course, there are kind of ups and downs, and but in the main, the idea that you wouldn't speak to one of your siblings or not see them, for a period of time would be extraordinary for us.
And you met David really young.
Yes. So he was my best friend's older brother. And so I probably met him first when I was about 17 or 18, and then we got together on it was his dad's 60th birthday, and he took his children and they could all bring a friend to a hotel in the south of Italy. And that's when Dave and I sort of got together, and we sort of knew each other a bit, but he was always, we were kind of naughty teenagers, and he was already quite serious and had a job and a kind of serious girlfriend. And so we always slightly took the piss out of him. He was sort of, Claire's square older brother. But then we sort of fell in love on this holiday, and everyone was unbelievably surprised. I don't think they'd ever thought. I was a bit of a hippie, and I was a teenager, virtually. And I don't think anyone had ever I think all the parents involved were sort of quite surprised when a couple of months later we were still together.
And then here you are. You've been married for 24 years, or together for 24 years?
Yeah, I can't remember. We got married in 96, I think. I think next year is my 50th birthday and our 25th wedding anniversary. Well,
hopefully we'll be out of lockdown and you'll be able to celebrate properly.
Yes, I hope so.
Did you talk about, I think when you get together really young, so me and my husband, we met at 13, and we had a relationship when we were 16, and then together properly from the age of 18. And for us, I found that when getting together young, you kind of think about having kids and, getting married and stuff, but it always seems so far in the distance.
Yes, it was definitely the same with us. I mean, partly also because I had my youngest sibling, I think is 13 years younger than me. So in my 20s, I still felt like a child. You start to behave in your family like the kind of, I mean, not in the workplace, but there's an element that you still feel like a child because your youngest sibling is a child. And so, particularly when you're home with your family, it's a bit like the sort of lowest common denominator. You all start behaving like the youngest one in the most sort of pathetic, juvenile way. So, of course, when I first met Dave, the idea that I would be having children myself when I still, felt like a child would be sort of absurd. Then I got really into my career. He's about nearly 5 years older than me, so his friends had started having babies, but it never really, although I knew I wanted to have a family, we were married for about 4 years before 3 or 4 years before I got pregnant, and together for quite a lot longer. And it was when my best friend got pregnant, and there was that sudden oh, wow.
We do this?
Yeah, and none of my, and I mean, she's a couple of years older than me, and none of my exact contemporaries were anywhere near. I mean, half of them weren't even married, never mind having children. And then suddenly when she got pregnant, it's almost that slightly competitive thing. I was like, oh, she's going to have a baby, I want one. And I'd always known I'd wanted a family, but just it hadn't occurred to me ever to have it do it then.
What was it like finding out you were pregnant?
I can't remember. That's the awful. I was lucky. With my fourth child, it took me a bit longer, and I had a miscarriage. I mean, I was 10 years older. But with my first one, I think I got married, virtually the first month that we tried. So I can't really remember. I remember just I had terrible morning sickness. That. Yes, yeah.
Because I think you kind of hear those stories of it, it might happen that way and whatever, and then you can let's just see what happens, and then it happens so quickly, and you're like, whoa,
yeah.
Like that life-changing decision that you kind of just make, and that's it, life changed.
Yes. No, it is. It's sort of extraordinary. And I think maybe less extraordinary for me because so many of Dave's friends had already started having kids, so it didn't feel like a totally alien thing. But not that I was particularly interested in anyone else's children, because having grown up with babies all around me, it was like either my stepmum or my mum was pregnant at sort of any particular point in time. It felt like people would come home from school, friends, and go, they'd be obsessed by all the babies, and I'd be going, oh my God, they're so boring. There's like loads of them. They're always turning up. Why do you find them exciting or interesting?
I love it. They're always turning up. There's always a baby somewhere.
There's always another baby. We're always having to be quiet because there's a baby sleeping somewhere.
So how have all of your pregnancies been quite different?
I had quite bad morning sickness with all of them. I mean, really bad, from sort of 6 to 14 weeks, I would say. Not being sick, but literally feeling like I wanted to die. I sort of imagine it's what it's like if you have sort of chemotherapy, like kind of every cell in your bone feels in sort of pain.
Yeah.
And then at about 16 weeks, I feel like kind of superwoman, like the kind of most beautiful, kind of energetic, amazing woman ever. And then you start to feel tired and not sleeping. And then mine all came between 2 weeks and a month early. So I've never had that kind of endless end bit. So
did you have C-sections with all of them?
Yes, because Ivan, my first son, he was undiagnosed breech. And so I went into hospital in labour and then was told I had to have a C-section. And then, because he was very disabled, when I had not because of the birth or anything, when I was pregnant with my second child, my daughter, and initially I thought I would try and have her naturally, because you can, if you've had one C-section, they'll let you try and have a natural birth a second time. But then obviously, if you're a parent of a disabled child and you know lots of other parents of disabled children, a lot of the time it can be from a birthing issue. And so I just thought, well, why take that risk? I've had one C-section already. I might as well have another. And so all of them ended up being C-sections. But where I was quite lucky was that because they all came quite early, I went into labour for all of them. So
really?
I don't know what it's like to have a C-section cold. I imagine that's quite strange, that you go in for a booked C-section and you're not in labour and you're kind of cut open. Whereas I was always, having contractions,
Well, did you have dates booked? And then
I had dates booked, but I just never made it to the date.
Well, when you caught short the fourth time round as well,
we were
in Cornwall?
Yeah. She was a month. So the girls were both a month early and the boys were both 2 weeks early.
Wow.
And I never really finished work. I think with all of them, I never got, I sort of had them either the day after I finished. I remember my stepmother ringing me with Elwyn, actually, and I was lying in bed and I said, oh, it's just so nice. It's my first lie-in, it's my first day off work before I have the baby. And then literally, as I was on the phone to her at 9 o'clock, I was like, oh, I think that might be my mucus plug. And I'd never known, when you have those maternity classes, or whatever they're called, antenatal classes, and they talk about the mucus plug. And then for the first two, I didn't know, never found it, saw it, whatever. And then with the third one, literally kind of lying there and going, yep, I think that's what it might be. I think it's time to get to the
I think, though, there's that thing of when you're finding things out as you go along, Like, I can remember my mucus plug coming out the first time and literally holding it in the toilet paper and being like, is it? Let's Google that. Let's Google image that and see, just compare. You know what I mean? Because you don't know.
Yeah.
What was it like meeting Ivan for the first time? That first moment where you became mum?
I think when you're pregnant, you bond so much with your baby, don't you? It feels like they're kind of part of you.
Yeah.
And you have this sort of amazing relationship with them that's so sort of close, because in some ways no one else is involved. It's just sort of you and them. And I think the surprising thing when they come out is this sort of immediate dawning realisation that they are their own person, that they're not you. And it's almost a bit of a kind of shock, because you're like, oh gosh, actually you're not me, you're your own person. And I mean, I think like all parents, you know you're going to love them, but you are quite overwhelmed. And also you worry you're not. I think you worry that you're not going to love them when you come out. And for some people that is a reality for whatever reason, or even if it's just for a short period of time. But no, I remember, I mean, with C-sections, there's a moment when they come out when you're like, don't give me the baby just yet.
Really?
Well, because you've had quite a lot of drugs, so you're feeling a bit kind of sick and kind of overwhelmed. Yeah. So it's a bit, a bit like when you feel like you're about to throw up, is that feeling of being very drunk or something. You just feel a bit overwhelmed. And so it's only for a couple of minutes, but there's just a few minutes when you're like, yeah, like give them to Dave. and then you can kind of have them, because it's quite a big deal.
Have you had the curtain thing each time where the baby kind of rises over the curtain?
Yes,
Is that something that happens?
And then they go, we're going to drop the curtain. And the first time they say they're going to drop the curtain, you're like, no. And then you realise actually your tummy is so enormous that there's no way you're going to see anything.
Yeah.
They didn't really need the curtain, because there's this massive thing between you and everything going on down there.
Well, that's quite a shock though, isn't it? I think, because I've never even thought about that as a C-section body. Like, you think the baby's coming out, and the first time that would have happened, it's a shock to know that your body is still visibly, it looks pregnant still.
And particularly with the C-section, because it doesn't go down as quickly as if I think you're in labour for kind of longer, and maybe the contractions stop quicker after you've given birth, I'm not sure. And so you end up being quite big.
Having had so many babies around, were you surprised at how different it felt holding your own baby?
The other thing with when you have a C-section baby, they're quite sleepy, well, if they're early.
Okay.
So with Ivan, he was a month early and he was a C-section baby, and they tend to be quite sleepy. And so obviously, although there were all kinds of issues, after the first couple of weeks he was born, because we found out that he was very ill. Initially, it was very easy. I'm not very good at breastfeeding. I didn't do much breastfeeding with any of them. I mean, I'm sure I could, and I did breastfeed for a month with Elwyn. That was about my longest, but it wasn't something I was very good at. But apart from the breastfeeding, which I wasn't particularly stressed about working or not, I found it quite easy, because particularly if they're quite sleepy and they're not crying straight away, it's pretty straightforward. And I've been brought up with lots of babies, and you change their nappy and you feed them, and it's not like it's very complicated. And so I really loved those first couple of weeks, and I felt like I took to it quite naturally. And I think my nanny, who I went home to my mum's with him, and my nanny was there. And I think because I'd been I'm not particularly maternal. I hadn't been obviously a kind of maternal, oh, I'm so desperate for a baby kind of person. I think she was sort of unbelievably surprised at how naturally I took to it. I think you just don't know, do you, until they arrive, what kind of mum you're going to be.
Are you surprised at the type of mum that you are? Because having thought you're not really that maternal, and you've had 4 children, you obviously like it.
Yes. No, I'm definitely maternal, but a working mum, and I think I'd always knew I would carry on working. I never kind of questioned that. I don't know why. Partly because we needed to financially, and partly maybe because my mum had always worked. So I think I probably have turned out to be the kind of mum I thought I would be. It's difficult to know. I feel like I've been doing it for quite a long time now. It's been 18 years, so...
You have. One thing you did do when you were pregnant with your 4th child is you moved to Downing Street. What was that like? Was it quite surreal knowing that you were going to... Because I know that you don't live there full time when that is... But was it quite surreal knowing that you were going to be bringing up your family?
No. I mean, yeah, you are living there full time. I mean, I tried not to move there initially, and all during the election campaign, it had always been something I'd said, I don't want to move to Downing Street with the kids. I just don't want to move. And then it becomes inevitable within the first week of, your husband becoming Prime Minister, that you are going to have to move there. The security people were like, we can't, it'll be a nightmare for your neighbours, we'll have to barricade off your street. And then you're like, okay, I give in. And then actually...
But also there must be that other thing as well, actually, if David's got to work and he could be called sort of downstairs at any minute, is it just easy, you all being there and that kind of you still being together?
No, definitely, and that's what it turned out to be. Because of the coalition, it was a fixed-term parliament, so we knew we were going to be there for 5 years in theory, which we were, and a little bit more. And so we decided, okay, we're going to move, so we're going to do it properly. So we rented out our house. We spent got a bit of a mortgage. We spent some money on the flat, did it up, moved all our own furniture in. So I was like, okay, if we're going to be here for 5 years, this is going to be home. I want it to be a really happy family home. I want this to be a really good kind of family experience for us. And it turned out to be just that. I will look back on it as a really happy time for us as a family. And, obviously, Dave's great at not bringing his kind of work home. He's very good at compartmentalising like that, and I think we were his kind of relaxation in some senses. He loves seeing the kids after a day at work, but he's not commuting, so we'd have breakfast. He'd get up at 5 and work for a few hours, and then we'd all have breakfast together, and then he'd go downstairs for the first sort of 8:30 meeting, and then he'd be back up with us by kind of 7:30, 8 o'clock. And also, in Downing Street, because you are Prime Minister, people, and you are working very hard, they don't want you to get sort of really overtired. So they are trying to protect you a bit. And so he could come up at kind of 8 o'clock at night, and then we could have time together for a few hours. And his way of working was, some ministers do all their work at night, but his was very much to get up at 5 in the morning and do it then before we all got up, so he could spend time with us in the evenings and over breakfast. So it worked really well, and it was a very happy time.
But what was it like having children there, though? Were you not constantly like, shh, shh, they're doing like official stuff downstairs? I get mum sweats over anything.
No, it's sort of huge. And then our apartment was sort of one end, and it's this big apartment. It's like a sort of enormous house within a house. So it was sort of, you're in a huge flat, much bigger than our house. The children's bedrooms were sort of enormous. They were like... and they kept saying to me that I just want a tiny bedroom like my friends have got. I don't want this big bedroom. Having to buy them all like double beds when they were tiny just to fill the room. And also there are kind of, because it's all bomb-proof, there are sort of the windows are all bomb-proof, and there's sort of thick sort of cement floors, so you don't hear anything. You're in this flat and it's totally quiet with these views over St James's Park, so you can kind of feel a bit like a kind of princess in a tower, totally cut off from everything going on in the kind of offices. It's a really beautiful flat, and you're cut off from everything going on in the offices downstairs, and you very rarely go in the front door because there's lots of press outside, so you come in a kind of quite sort of scruffy back entrance through the offices and then upstairs to this apartment in a lift. So of course it's different from being in a kind of terraced house in W10, which is what we were in before, but not that different. It didn't impact the way you behaved as a family particularly. And the children, I went to work every day, 3 days a week to Smythson, and the children went to the same school every day, but we just did the school run from a slightly different direction from everyone else. People came for play dates. Piano teachers came round. We led a really normal family life there. It was weirder at the weekends, but we did normally go to Oxfordshire or to Chequers, because the time when it was weird there at the weekend was weirdly when the offices were all empty. Right. And so when you leave the flat, it does feel like being in I can't really explain, it almost feels a bit lonely, because there's this really empty building, and you're also in a part of London which isn't really a kind of villagey family part of London. So we didn't spend the weekend there very much. We would either go to Chequers or to our parents or to our cottage in the constituency.
Did it help knowing that it was for, well, it would likely be for a set amount of time as well? You knew it wasn't going to be long term, like forever. It was going to be, this kind of experience, years rather than a decade.
Yes, and I think that's what we always said to the children about everything, whether it was about... And I think it was hardest with Florence. The older two really understood that because they remembered being at home before, but for Florence was born there. So I think always explaining to them that this it was home, but it wasn't home forever. But I mean, lots of children, if they're from a military family or, you know, whatever reasons, move around a lot. It's not like that's such a home is where your parents are. It's not a building, is it really? So
what about moving out though? Because that all happened so quickly. Did they have a chance to sort of say goodbye? I know that you packed up the house on your own, but how did you explain it to them?
So my daughter was on a school trip in France, so that was quite weird. I mean, we knew at that stage that they were doing the Tory leadership election, but we had thought we weren't moving out until August, September time, and this would have been, I suppose, in July. And so we only had 2 days warning for actually having to, I think we would, I think on the Monday we heard, and we moved out on the Wednesday. So we got Nance back from her school trip really quickly, and, you know, I talked to the children, and the day before, or was it that morning? I can't remember now. I decided all I was going to do, I wasn't going to pack a box. I made the house look really nice, and I put flowers everywhere and made it all look really tidy and perfect. And a friend of mine who's a photographer who did photographs at our wedding, I rang him up and said, Ollie, I know it's weird, but he lives in Dorset. Can you come up and take some photos of us here and with all the staff in Downing Street, because so we can kind of remember it. So I can't remember if it was the day before or the morning or the day, I can't remember quite how the timing worked, but I tried to make it a really sort of special time that wasn't about moving. It was just about creating this really nice memory of our time there. And then the children left with Dave out of the front door, in front of all the cameras. And then, you know, they never came back. They never, they don't come back. Whereas I could then sort of come in the back door again and start packing frantically. But I mean, you've seen it happen. I think if your husband's in politics, it's brutal. I mean, you know it's brutal. You know, British politics is brutal. And from the first moment he went into politics, I think I'd always been very realistic about the things that could and would happen to us. And, you know, you take a decision not to be, you know, upset by them or surprised by them, or, you know, I think you have to go into it with that attitude, because if you don't, I think it could be quite upsetting and traumatising.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely love the fact that you completely celebrated your time there. I think that's so beautiful as a family. Rather than making it a sad thing that you're moving, it's like we had this amazing experience for 6 years, you know.
Yeah, in this beautiful place, and the staff there was so lovely. And, you know, Florence had grown up with them. You become very close to them. You know, all the people working in the building, whether it's the, you know, lovely ladies running the cafe downstairs, or the security, or the doorman, or the cleaners. Yeah, there's a little cafe right downstairs. 'Cause it's a big office. There's probably a couple of hundred people working there in pretty kind of not particularly nice offices, because it's an old building, so the air conditioning doesn't really work, and they're all quite kind of dusty and dark, dingy.
I love that my only reference for Downing Street, of what it looks like inside there, is Love Actually.
Which it is. So the bit, so the kind of formal bits are very like that. It is, okay. You know, it is very like that. But there's also, so then there's our flat, and then the number, we're in the number 11, in fact, the number 10 flat upstairs where George Osborne was. And then there's just there's quite a lot of offices. And so there were particular people that Florence would go, from when she was a baby, would go round with our nanny Geeta at the time and sit on their desks and eat their biscuits and their sweets and cuddle the cat. And, you know, her, not so much for the older children, because they went to school every day and we didn't really spend time there in the holidays or weekends. But for Florence, it was her kind of home and her family.
And was it in 2017 that you decided to set up your own fashion label?
Yes. So, well, probably I'd thought about it or started working on it a couple of years before, but I was still working 3 days a week at Smythson, so I sort of did it a bit in my spare time. But I started doing it properly in 2017.
By that point, you thought, the kids are growing up a bit. I've got a bit of extra time. Let's just add something else to the mix.
Yeah, well, there's not really any extra time, is there? But
no, exactly.
I think it was this kind of point in my life where I thought, I've always wanted to do this thing, and if I don't do it now, then I never will. And it started out as more like a kind of hobby while I was in Downing Street, just to sort of see how it would, you know, whether I could make it work. And then, you know, day by day, it sort of then turned into something that was real. But it it was quite slow over a period of 2 or 3 years before it actually became a kind of proper business. And then it was
And the name
mayhem.
is inspired by your children?
Yes, I never wanted to call the brand after me. I'm not that kind of person. You think, God, what do I... nowadays, weirdly, lots of website words and URLs have gone because people have bought them up. And so you have to sort of make up these slightly strange sort of names. And so it seemed fairly natural to me to come up with some kind of anagram, I don't know what you call it, of my children's initials.
Yeah. And I just assumed it was French. Cefinn.
No, well, it's pronounced Cefinn.
Like
Actually, initially it was spelt with an S for Samantha, and then I ran into trademark problems, so it was Sefin, so Samantha, Elwyn, Florence, Ivan, Nancy. Which also, and I'm partly, my mum is half Welsh, who was also a Welsh sort of queen or goddess or something. She was some sort of, early, sort of from hundreds of years ago, sort of feminist, sort of Welsh lady. So it sort of, when I looked up the kind of word, that's what came up. So it seemed quite appropriate that it was this sort of strong Welsh woman and my children's initials. But then I ran into trademark problems just as we were about to launch the business. Many of the many pitfalls or ups and downs of being an entrepreneur, and so I had to change the spelling sort of slightly.
Yeah. And how have you found the juggle of having that? Is it different having your own thing?
Yes. I've always worked, and I think, like Dave, I'm very good at compartmentalising. I don't, when I'm at home, and when I'm at work, and I don't really mix the two. I think I'm quite male in a way. I can only do one thing at a time. Whereas when I'm at work, I'm not sitting there panicking about the children and kind of ringing the nanny all day. I'm quite good at compartmentalising, but definitely it is a big difference when it's your own business, because whether it's waking up in the middle of the night and worrying, you can't leave it at the office like you do if you're working for someone else. But I think I've probably been doing it, working and being a mum, long enough that it's easier to cope with. I think if you were doing a startup and were a young mum, I think that would be really hard.
It's really interesting though, because so if you're compartmentalising, at least you can get everything done in those working hours and just have that as dedicated focus time.
Yes.
So that it doesn't spill over.
No, exactly. And I'm quite organised, and I get up very early in the morning. I have a bit of me time. I think you just have to build that structure into the day, so then you're not feeling like you're failing everyone and everything all of the time, which I think can happen if you let work come into family life or family life come into work. So
I think there are just so many areas of motherhood that leave you feeling like a failure a lot.
Day.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you experience mum guilt?
I don't. I'm not sure it's guilt, because having had a working mum, I think it is much easier because you've turned out okay.
Yeah.
And you've worked hard and been successful, and I don't have issues about anything, and so I think it makes it much, much easier. But do I feel like a failure all the time, or very imperfect, or I'm not doing a good enough job? Oh my God, 100% of the time. You can never do a good enough job as a parent, can you?
Well, does that shift as they get older as well?
No.
Because then they can vocalise that to you as well.
No, I think it gets more complicated, and the problems get trickier and less easy to solve, and the balance between being kind of firm but also wanting to make sure that they'll come and talk to you if there's an issue is such a kind of fine balance with teenagers that I think it gets harder and harder. And also, I remember talking to Alexandra Schulman, actually, I remember when her son was about 18, going, oh, is it so much easier? When mine was still quite little, is it so much easier now they're grown up? And she was like, no, it just gets worse, because, you can't solve the problems anymore. It's much more heartbreaking, because when they were little, you could just pick them up and stop them crying.
Stick a plaster on it.
And then when they get big and their heart's broken, or they're depressed, or whatever it might be, you can't solve those problems.
It must be really hard, because all you want to do is fix them.
Yes. No, and I think that was what was really tough with Ivan. Is I couldn't fix him. You've got this baby, and with most other parents, you can kind of you can kind of fix or solve the problem, particularly when they're little. You know, they need feeding or they're nappy changing or whatever it is, and you just can't fix the problem. But I think that's just being a parent. And I think actually for my parents, when I had Ivan, I think that was incredibly hard, because it was probably the first time in their parenting that something had happened to one of their children that, you know, was, you know, devastatingly hard, and they couldn't solve that problem for me either, you know. So I think it's just ongoing, isn't it?
It must be really hard, because for you would be aware of that as well. So I imagine in that situation, it's lots of people trying to do the right thing for everyone, and everyone just everyone being at a loss and not knowing how to make things better, for want of a better word.
Yeah, no, it's it's exactly like that. But I think the thing that it gives you is that you do kind of, you know, it's just about getting through each day and enjoying all the kind of really, you really appreciate every moment that everything's fine, you know, everything's fine. And I think it does give you that amazing sort of thing for the rest of your life. Being in, you know, really tough situations where the tiny glimmers of okayness become so sort of amazing that you everything is very much in perspective. You're not spoilt. I mean, because you really appreciate even the tiniest things.
There's a gorgeous photo of Ivan that's come up time and time again whenever I've been researching you, which is the one of him smiling.
Yes, and he didn't smile, you know, a lot of the time. And so that is a kind of amazing photo. You know, the love you feel for a child that is, you know, that helpless is sort of extraordinary. And it's, you know, very different when you have a normal child, because he was my first child. When you have a normal child that can kind of do things for themselves, and, you know, it's a very different experience.
How do you think Ivan has affected you as a mum?
I think much less expectations. Probably. Of course, not that I don't have expectations for my children. I do nag them when they don't do their homework or this. But you're not. I think sometimes people can have children, they want them to be perfect, you know, and I think that you just become very kind of more accepting of just whatever is. You're not looking for any kind of perfection anymore. You're just so grateful for anything that's just okay. You're not expecting your children to be, you know, Wimbledon tennis stars or get into Oxford, or you're just happy if they're just fine.
Fine is good.
Well,
fine is perfect for you.
Fine is good. Fine is good. Yeah.
How has motherhood and having a family affected your relationship with David?
I think we're a mixture of both being quite kind of selfish on the one hand, but quite good parents on the other. So I like to think we find a nice balance of finding time for ourselves and for us as a couple, and while being good parents to them. But it's very much a team. It's a team effort. He's great like that. You know, we very much do it together. He changed nappies and from day one. The thing I always think is a really good thing to do when you get home, I sort of always word of advice to kind of new mums, and some take it and some don't, but is he always bathed the babies from the first day they came home from the hospital. It's one of the hardest things to do, isn't it? Bathing a baby in those plastic basin things, you know. And even though he was working, we would do the bathing. You know, the books say bath your baby in the morning, but we didn't do that. He'd come home from work and he'd get a whiskey and he'd get in the bath, and I'd put, you know, even from like the first day they were back in hospital with Florence, and I'd put the baby in the bath. And that was always his bonding. And I think you've got to kind of let them have their thing from the first moment, and then they'll change the nappies and do anything you want. But as soon as you stop them kind of being involved, I think it's hard to then expect them to come in again at a later stage and be super dad. Yeah.
Well, you've gone through so much from getting together so young. You know, you've grown up together, you've had children together, you lost Ivan together, you know, and now you've got teenagers together who are soon going to go off and fly and have their own lives without you. And then it's back to you two again. And I find that a very strange thought for me and my husband, and our kids are only young still, that at some point we're going to go through all this stuff, and at some point it's going to go back to being just us again.
I think we spent long enough together before we had children that's quite exciting. I think we know that we get on. I mean, if we can stay together, obviously you mustn't sort of, the moment you say you're going to kind of stay together forever, you'll probably end up getting divorced.
Touch wood.
Sort of tempting fate, isn't it? But I think we were together long enough before we had children that we know we get on really well, and there's so much stuff that we like doing together. We're not very good, well, I'm not very good at ever spending time away from the children with him on my own. And there was a couple of years ago when he was travelling a lot, about a year after Downing Street, and I was really working hard on my business. And it was one of the few times in our marriage when I sort of thought, I'm not sure we're getting on very well. This is really weird. And actually, we just went away for 3 days together, away from the children. And I think partly because I do work, I then and I'm a bit of a control freak about kind of all the logistics and everything else. I'm not very good at ever leaving them. And I think you can't, if you're working, you have to choose between work and other stuff and your children. So you can't do everything. You can't kind of work and have a social life and go off on holiday with your husband on your own and be a parent. And I choose to work and be a parent and not do the other stuff. So we're not very good at going away with each other. But we did go to New York for 3 days. And I have to say, we came back and you're like, it was amazing. Have 3 days on your own together somewhere else, going around art galleries and restaurants that had nothing to do with children, put us straight back on track again. So I think I look forward to that time when we can spend a bit more time together, travelling or going to restaurants. We never go out at night anymore because once you've got teenagers, you just got to be around.
That's coming out of lockdown, Sam. That's the other side of this, surely.
No, really. You've got to go out when they're little. They go to bed at 7:30.
That's very true.
You just wait, make the most of it. I think we definitely went out more when they were little. I mean, it wasn't very much, but we would go out to restaurants or whatever, even just on our own together for a sort of date night. Whereas once you have teenagers, you really feel like you've got to be there all the time. I mean, it's not to say we don't go out for dinner with friends, but, probably less than we ever have because your parenting starts in the evening.
Yeah. Well, that's a weird... So you would have had a moment where you come home and all of a sudden they're there with you until beyond you going to bed. They stay up later.
Yes. At the weekends, I'm like, please go to bed before kind of 1 a.m. when I'm going to bed, so 10 minutes after the 10 o'clock news has started. And there's a limit to what you can, and you're like, leave your phone downstairs, which in the week I do take their phones off them at 9 and hope they don't sneak down, and they do go to bed a bit earlier in theory. But at the weekends, they're of an age where if they want to stay up watching telly till 12, 1 a.m, I mean, it's not for me to say they can't, age 16 really.
So funny how that just creeps up on you.
Yeah, and it does creep up on you. But it's great. I'm really enjoying having the teenagers. It was quite rocky to start with when my daughter suddenly became teenage, and she did with an absolute vengeance. I had to kind of, get back to the parenting books. There are some good ones out there. I really recommend them.
Oh, really?
Yes, definitely. But actually now, having kind of got through that kind of initial stage, I'm loving it. That's what's great about being a parent, isn't it? It just changes all the time. It's never boring.
I guess that's even with you and David, having been with my husband from young, you go through stages where you do you drift and you drift, you come back towards each other. And I think that's the same in parenting as well. Like you have moments where you're kind of at loggerheads and then it kind of eases and you're really getting on. And because everyone is constantly learning, whether that's you as a mum or them experiencing whatever they're experiencing and going through a new development stage, it's constantly moving. You just got to hope that you keep coming back together.
Yes. No, I think I think marriage and children exactly like that. I mean, with all my girlfriends, we have that conversation where they go, how are you? I really love my children at the moment. I really hated them last week. It's just sort of, or you do feel like it's all going quite well and you're being quite a good mum, and there are other periods when you're like, oh my gosh,
See, I really worry when I'm in that moment where I'm like, this is going really well. Like with homeschooling last week, I was like, we are on top of it. The juggling's going well. And then yesterday or Monday, that was it. I was in floods of tears. Yeah. So you always kind of like, you're thinking it's really good, but knowing that's not a really good thing to think because it's going to go the other way.
I reckon you've got 2 weeks at the most at any one time. And then something goes horribly wrong.
Pass.
Yes.
Are there parts of your childhood that you really want to pass on to your children, that you really want to give them?
Yeah, that's definitely one of my failing bits.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, I was a massive bookworm. I read from the age of 7. I didn't learn to read very easily. And then when I did, I read books and books and books and books. Sometimes like 20 books a week, even if it was just like Enid Blyton's or Agatha Christie's or whatever. None of my children will read books. So that I've got 3 and none of them really read. None of them are bookworms. Other people's children are. So I feel like I've sort of failed in that respect, because books for me was such a kind of window on the world. And then I think nature, although I was brought up in London for the first few years, I then was best friends with we lived in the middle of the countryside, with my mum from the age of, I was about 5 or 6 onwards, and I was the farmer's daughter and the village's best friend, and we roamed wild and built kind of haystack camps and kind of, were out in the fields till kind of late at night and bird watching and all this stuff. And I think I really wanted that for my children. And I think they have a bit of that because we're in the country at the weekend, but not to the extent that I did. And I think, for so many reasons, work mainly, I suppose, it can be impossible to recreate things that you had in your childhood. But they probably have lots of things that I didn't have. They've travelled more, they've been abroad more. There were so many of us, we never went abroad, or, they've had an amazing time in Downing Street. They've probably got lots more friends, because my mum was so young when she had me and my nearest sister, Emily. They have a kind of a social life with our friends and their children. Yeah. Because I had, a lot of my best friends had children at the same time, so they have this amazing kind of almost like extended family of kind of children their age, which I probably didn't have in the same way. So, there's something new, isn't there, for every generation.
Yeah, so you don't need to feel too bad
about
the things that you didn't get. Have you surprised yourself as a man?
I'm surprised I went through 4 pregnancies.
Really?
Well, you look back on them and I just see my sister, I've got one of my sisters pregnant at the moment, and you look back and think, oh my God, I did that 4 times. It is sort of extraordinary parenting, or, wanting to become pregnant again. It's quite a sort of weird thing. And it does make you realise, I can't imagine having kind of, someone who worked for me at Smyton, who was one of 8, but from one mum. My mum's only had 5, but her mum had 8 children. Wow. And that I really kind of couldn't imagine. So yes, having had 4 pregnancies, I sort of look back and think, oh my God, how did I do that?
How did you know to leave it at 4? Were you like, 5 is not where I'm going. I'm leaving it there.
I think, well, partly because I'd had 4 cesareans and I had a placenta previa with my last one. So the doctors actually said to me, you can't have any more. But I had all because Florence was a bit younger. Maybe I should have another one really quickly. So she has a kind of a sibling.
Mate, yeah.
So I did consider it. And also I think as a choice between do I start a business, do I start my own business, which is something I'd wanted to do all my life, or do I have another child? So in the sense, the doctors made that decision for me to some extent.
Yeah. So I finished, well, no, actually, first, I wrote a book this year called Letters on Motherhood, which is a series of letters on motherhood, as it sounds. They're letters to my kids, to myself, different bodily parts, and my husband and strangers and everything. So I was wondering, if you could write a letter on motherhood, who would it be to and what would it say?
Oh, gosh, that's a really hard question. I don't know. I'd probably write a letter to my husband saying, thanks for sticking with me all these years. I couldn't have done it without you. I think it'd probably be that letter.
There is that strange thing though, isn't it? I think if you'd have chosen to have children with anyone else, how different everything would be.
Yes.
Firstly, the children would be different, obviously, different genetics. But it's that thing of you are the parent you are because of who you're doing it alongside or not doing it alongside, whether you're doing it on your own. Everything kind of factors into the mum that you are.
Yes. No, I think that would be the letter. It sounds a bit soppy, but it would be to my husband, just saying, thanks, we did this together. It was quite a long haul, but we had fun along the way.
See you for a dinner date soon.
Yeah, just the 2 of us.
And I end the podcast by you finishing 3 sentences. So the first one is being a mum means...
Never sitting down. I think your life being so full in a kind of brilliant way.
Since having children,
I'm fitter. I've had to keep really fit. Yeah, definitely fitter and more organised.
And I'm happy when?
I think when we're all together and the children aren't on screens and we're all kind of chatting and they're all getting on. And it is kind of rare when you're all 5 of you are kind of together chatting, and my little one's not going, oh, this is boring, can I get down? Or, or one of the older ones isn't sort of picking a fight. I think it's those moments when we sit down for all our meals together. Days really, 3 meals a day or 2 meals. Now the teenagers don't get up for breakfast, but it's those moments when we're all, together at the table and the conversation really starts flowing, and particularly when they're teenage, those moments are really special.
Yeah. Put a plate of food in front of them and they just start opening up.
Yes. And you've been there for half an hour or so and they haven't said, can I go and watch the telly, or, talk to my friend. I think that's what's been quite good about the lockdown, is that none of their friends are doing anything. So my daughter said, I really miss my friends. And I will go call them or do a FaceTime. She says, I know, but there's nothing to talk about. It's not even like we can kind of bitch about our teachers, because we're not seeing them either.
That's so true.
So actually, they'd rather talk to you than anyone else, because, we've got some chicks we can talk about. We've got some baby chicks, so we can talk about those and what we're going to do today, or what's the next meal going to be. And I think that's what's so nice is, you just have to, really kind of... It's been really lovely just sort of being together without any of those outside distractions.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm glad that we're not the only ones who wake up for breakfast and go, so what are we having for dinner tonight?
That's all we talk about.
Samantha, thank you so much for being a guest. You have been a joy to talk to.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.